Minister of Finance and Coordinating Minister of the Economy, Mr. Wale Edun, yesterday stressed the need for Nigeria and other developing countries who are implementing reforms and other forms of structural adjustment programs to ensure that the vulnerable populations in the respective countries are protected. Edun said this on the same day the International Monetary Fund, in its latest World Economic Outlook report, downgraded Nigeria's growth prospects for 2024 from 3.3% to 2.9%. Responding to this day's question during a media briefing of the Intergovernmental Group of 24, G24, on international monetary affairs and development, Edun noted that developing countries must focus on implementing sustainable reforms at the macroeconomic level while ensuring that the most vulnerable populations are protected from the immediate costs of those reforms. He underscored the importance of planning for social safety nets to help the poor and vulnerable cope with the immediate impact of such reforms, which often lead to a spike in the cost of living. All right, that's what we've been saying a lot of times, Rufai, protecting the most vulnerable whilst implementing some of these reforms that have been touted in many quarters, especially by the World Bank and the Nigerian government, as being important, necessary, and will have long-term benefits. Your take on this story?
Truth has to be said. I'm happy about what Wale Edun said, but the question we should ask him is, have they implemented this, stopgap measures to be able to help the vulnerable people? No. We have not seen anything as regards to conditional cash transfer, which is not only the thing. Also, what about help? What about productivity in the economy? Yeah. Because the greatest way to be able to bring people out of poverty is to be able to bring about productivity in the economy. China did it. There were millions, hundreds of millions of people in poverty in the 80s in China. Today, as at early 2000, China's poverty rate has gone to about maybe less than 10%. And it is shown that it is possible, but you need to be able to inject capital into the economy. And that's why we say part of these reforms are hurting people that create jobs. Manufacturing does create a lot of jobs. Yeah. But when you are taking, all the subsidies that they enjoy out in the electricity tariff and all of that, then you're destroying their prospects. Look at Mr. Carl Toriola of MTN saying this morning that if you do not do something about the power sector, with this 5% increase in taxes they want to put forward, it's going to die like Nitel. Other businesses are complaining. The agricultural sector, how can we bring people in? Agricultural sector has been greatly hampered by insecurity. You need to fix that also. Also, other sectors of the economy, mining, we've not got a hand on mining. So these are the things that if we do, then we can create jobs for the vulnerable people. But before then, we need to give food handouts, food stamps, conditional cash transfer program that is tied to very veritable outcomes, and also providing the basic healthcare, water, and education, and all those things. And all those things can be done if only we stop the padding of the budget and we reduce corruption by a proportionate amount in society.
All right. Dr. Martin?
Okay, very quickly. Mr. Wale Edun was speaking at a forum for the developing countries, the G24. And he made a number of specific points. And those points are the things to be interrogated, and also what he said about lessons that have been learned, which is a question that was put to him by a Rice News correspondent who is on the ground in Washington, D.C., that Rotu Sudiri. Now, as to the specific issues that he asked for, he's asking for concessional loans for developing countries and saying that, look, they need more. I think the question to ask in regard to that is that, look, what is it that African leaders do with the concessional funding that they get? It's like he's saying, look, African developing countries, need more money. African countries are saying, what is the value that is put on the table? Now he's saying that specifically with Nigeria, increased oil production would ensure, foreign exchange stability. Well, yes, a lot of people have been saying that, but has the government done that? What we have in that regard is just promises, And then, of course, he was asked the question, what lessons have we learned? He said, well, one, macroeconomic policies reform should not be an afterthought. They should be properly planned before they are introduced. Oh, that's music to our ears. Because in Nigeria here, people always say the removal of subsidy, it wasn't properly thought through before it was introduced. Other policies were not thought through. What is Mr. Edun's point? His point is that, look, when you want to introduce policies, also, you must have planned ahead. You must have looked at the implications. You must have looked at initiatives that you can use to plug hardships for the people. That's very beautiful music, because this is also what Nigerians have been talking about. He went further to say that government, when you are reforming, you must also provide safety nets, social safety nets for the people. And that those social safety nets, must have been properly considered. This is what Nigerians are saying. So I think it's an excellent thing that Mr. Wale Edun, Minister of Finance and Coordinating Minister of the Economy, is a very honest man, honest enough to say that the Tinubu administration has learned certain lessons about how they went about policy reforms in Nigeria. He made another point. He talked about communication. He said communication is very critical, that you have to communicate to the people, explain things to them, tell them the deliverables, tell them what will happen. Beautiful music. And Mr. Edun is a very honest man. And I think that I like the honesty that he has demonstrated with the hardship that Nigerians are going through. It probably means that some of the things we are saying, the government is beginning to listen. But this is Wale Edun talking. What is the Nigerian government doing? What are they saying? Because he also said, look, when reforms come, the delivery, the cost of living crisis impact is immediate, but the effect will be longer term. That's why the people need, buffers. Yeah. Okay, so, since the minister who is coordinating the economy is so well aware in a special moment of anagnosis, as they call it in Greek, drama, I hope that when it comes back home, we will see those lessons learned, guiding this government going forward. That is the story.
Excellent. Now, I was just going to touch on some of the things, the lessons learned in particular, and I was going to say that I'm very glad that Mr. Wale Edun has been very open and honest in his response, finally admitting that perhaps when these reforms were announced last year, they weren't properly thought out, and some of the impact or the implications of these reforms were not properly prepared for or catered for. And that's why we're seeing the impact on the Nigerian people so hard and so harsh. Remember that in the initial sense, when the fuel, when subsidy was removed, there were a number of things that were said were going to be done for the Nigerian people, which haven't all been fulfilled. Recall how long it took for them to have the minimum wage conversation, finally arriving at a figure that's not yet up to the inflation that Nigerians are experiencing, and not yet a take-home pay for Nigerians, but at least a move, one step, forward. But still, we still have a challenge with implementation. It means that a number of people are unable to even meet these needs. It means that Nigerians are still earning their old wages and still having to pay a lot more for transportation, for food, and many other items. That's a challenge there, so not well thought out in that way, and that's why people are suffering to the extent that they are suffering. Another thing they talked about was the CNG conversion, that, okay, because of the fact that they're removing subsidy, they'll ensure that CNG cars are made available. The government had a presidential CNG initiative. Again, we've seen how slowly the take-up of that has been, and the promises haven't yet quite been kept. These are some of the challenges. So it means that some of these policies were sort of an afterthought. And so when we talk about the sufferings of the people and how some of these reforms, despite how much they're saying that it would benefit us in the long term, and it is, childbirth pains, the pangs of childbirth, and we've said even in childbirth, you'll get some form of painkillers. And if you're not careful, you can lose both the mother and the child, making the process absolutely ineffective. And so what we're calling on is that, having identified this, some of the things I would say is this. Number one, the social safety nets, the social register they've talked about, can we begin to implement these conditional cash transfers? I know there are many schools of thought around this, whether or not, or is it how long can we continue conditional cash transfer? In the interim, to save the people who are the most vulnerable, let us do it. But the criticism of that has been its lack of transparency. The fact that the people most in need of it have not been able to see this. Some of the interventions in agriculture, can we begin to see the fruits of them? He also said something very critical critical around communication. He said we must communicate what is being done, what is to be expected, and also the timing of the various activities. Absolutely. What is the National Orientation Agency doing in this regard? We've talked about this a lot of times. This is where they must work in synergy with the government to ensure that the people are adequately informed through mediums that people listen to. Not saying, oh, we released a gazette or a thing that people are not reading, people are not aware of. If you are communicating and it's not reaching the intended, then it's a failure of communication. And so the people must be carried along to see that we're all in this together. And finally, the optics. If you are asking people to sacrifice, we still keep on maintaining the fact that the government itself must be seen to be tightening its belt and not spending lavishly whilst the people are suffering. These are some of the things we've talked about, and I'm glad that they're now saying it themselves, and hopefully we'll begin to see changes in this regard.